which is to look into how this whole 3-year saga began that our country's now lived through for these 3 years. So those are the things that matter, and I look forward to hearing from that.
Mr. Mueller, I want to focus on one word in your report. It's the second to the last word in the report. It's exonerate. The report states, accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it does not exonerate him. Now, in the judiciary hearing, in your prior testimony, you've already agreed with Mr. Radcliffe that exonerate is not a legal term, that there is not a legal test for this. So I have a question for you, Mr. Mueller. Mr. Mueller, does the Attorney General have the power or authority to exonerate? Now, what I'm putting up here is the United States Code. This is where the Attorney General gets his power, and the Constitution, and the annotated cases of these, which we've searched. We even went to your law school, because I went to Case Western, but I thought maybe your law school teaches it differently, and we got the criminal law textbook from your law school. Mr. Mueller, nowhere in these, because we had them scanned, is there a process or description on exonerate. There's no office of exoneration at the Attorney General's office. There's no certificate at the bottom of his desk. Mr. Mueller, would you agree with me that the Attorney General does not have the power to exonerate?
I'm going to pass on that.
Why?
Because it embroils us in a legal discussion, and I'm not prepared to do a legal discussion in that arena.
Well, Mr. Mueller, you would not disagree with me when I say that there is no place that the Attorney General has the power to exonerate, and he's not been given that authority. You would not.
Again, I'm not going to. I take your question.
Great. Well, the one thing that I guess is that the Attorney General probably knows that he can't exonerate either. And that's the part that kind of confuses me. Because if the Attorney General doesn't have the power to exonerate, then you don't have the power to exonerate. And I believe he knows he doesn't have the power to exonerate. And so this is the part that I don't understand. If your report is to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General doesn't have the power to exonerate, and he does not, and he knows that you do not have that power, you don't have to tell him that you're not exonerating the president. He knows this already. So then that kind of changed the context of the report.
No, we included in the report for exactly that reason. He may not know it, and he should know it.
So you believe that the Attorney Bill Barr believes that somewhere in the hallways of the Department of Justice there's an office of exoneration?
No, that's not what I said.
Well, I believe he knows, and I don't believe you put that in there for Mr. Barr. I think you put that in there for exactly what I'm going to discuss next, and that is, so the Washington Post yesterday, when speaking of your report, the article said Trump could not be exonerated of trying to obstruct the investigation itself. Trump could not be exonerated. Now that statement is correct, Mr. Mueller, isn't it, in that no one can be exonerated? The reporter wrote this. This reporter can't be exonerated. Mr. Mueller, you can't be exonerated. In fact, in our criminal justice system, there is no power or authority to exonerate. Now, this is my concern, Mr. Mueller. This is the headline on all of the news channels while you were testifying today. Mueller, Trump was not exonerated. Now, Mr. Mueller, what you know is that this can't say Mueller exonerated Trump, because you don't have the power or authority to exonerate Trump. You have no more power to declare him exonerated than you have the power to declare him Anderson Cooper. So the problem that I have here is that since there's no one in the criminal justice system that has that power, the president pardons, he doesn't exonerate. Courts and juries don't declare innocent, they declare not guilty. They don't even declare exoneration. The statement about exoneration is misleading, and it's meaningless, and it colors this investigation one word out of the entire portion of your report, and it's a meaningless word that has no legal meaning.
Can you let me make it easier?
Go ahead.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique situation.
Well, you can't. Time is short. I've got 5 minutes. Let's just leave it at you can't find it, because I'll tell you why. It doesn't exist. The special counsel's job, nowhere does it say that you were to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or that the special counsel report should determine whether or not to exonerate him. It's not in any of the documents. It's not in your appointment order. It's not in the special counsel regulations. It's not in the OLC opinions. It's not in the Justice Manual, and it's not in the principles of federal prosecution. Nowhere do those words appear together, because respectfully, Director, it was not the special counsel's job to conclusively determine Donald Trump's innocence or to exonerate him, because the bedrock principle of our justice system is a presumption of innocence. It exists for everyone. Everyone is entitled to it, including sitting presidents. And because there is a presumption of innocence, prosecutors never, ever need to conclusively determine it.
Given your 22 months of investigation, tens of millions of dollars spent, and millions of documents reviewed, did you obtain any evidence at all that any American voter changed their vote as a result of Russians' election interference?
I'm not going to speak to that.
You can't speak to that? After 22 months of investigation, there's not any evidence in that document before us that any voter changed their vote because of their interference, and I'm asking you based on all the documents that you reviewed.
That was outside our purview.
Russian meddling was outside your purview?
But the impact of that meddling was undertaken by other agencies.
Okay, you stated in your opening statement that you would not get into the details of the Steele dossier. However, multiple times in Volume 2 on page 23, 27, and 28, you mentioned the unverified allegations. How long did it take you to reach the conclusion that it was unverified?
I'm not going to speak to that.
It's actually in your report multiple times that it's unverified, and you're telling me that you're not willing to tell us how you came to the conclusion that it was unverified.
True.
When did you become aware that the unverified Steele dossier was included in the FISA application to spy on Carter Page?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
When did you become aware that the unverified Steele dossier was included in the FISA application to spy on Carter Page?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Your team interviewed Christopher Steele, is that correct?
Not going to get into that.
You can't tell this committee as to whether or not you interviewed Christopher Steele in a 22-month investigation with 18 lawyers.
As I said at the outset, that is one of the investigations that is being handled by others in the Department of Justice.
Yeah, but you're here testifying about this investigation today. And I am asking you directly, did any members of your team or did you interview Christopher Steele in the course of your investigation?
And I am not going to answer that question, sir.
You had 2 years to investigate. Not once did you consider it worthy to investigate how an unverified document that was paid for by a political opponent was used to obtain a warrant to spy on the opposition political campaign. Did you do any investigation in that whatsoever?
I do not accept your characterization of what occurred.
What would be your characterization?
I'm not going to speak any more to it.
So you can't speak any more to it, but you're not going to agree with my characterization. Is that correct?
Yes.
Reach that conclusion?
Well, we were ongoing for 2 years.
Right, you were ongoing, you wrote it at some point during that 2-year period, but at some point you had to come to a conclusion that I don't think there's not a conspiracy going on here. There was no conspiracy between this president, I'm not talking about the rest of the president's team, I'm talking about this president and the Russians.
As you understand, in developing a criminal case, you get pieces of information, witnesses, and the like, as you make your case.
Right.
And when you make a decision on a particular case depends on a number of factors.
Right, I understand.
So I cannot say specifically that we reached a decision on a particular defendant at a particular point in time.
But it was some time well before you wrote the report, fair enough? I mean, you wrote the report dealing with a whole myriad of issues. Certainly at some time prior to that report is when you reached the decision that, okay, with regard to the president himself, I don't find anything here. Fair enough?
Well, I'm not certain I do agree with that.
So you waited till the last minute when you were actually writing the report and say, oh, okay. Well,
no, but there are various aspects of the development of
Sure, and that's my point. There are various aspects that happen, but somewhere along the pike, you will come to a conclusion. There's no there for this defendant. Isn't that right? So apparently
I can't speak.
You can't say when. Fair enough. I'm asking the sworn witness. Mr. Mueller, evidence suggests that on May 10th, 2017, at approximately 7:45 a.m., 6 days before the DAG's Deputy Attorney General appointed you special counsel, Mr. Rosenstein called you and mentioned the appointment of a special counsel. Not necessarily that you'd be appointed, but that you had a discussion of that. Is that true? May 10th, 2017.
I don't have any. I don't have any knowledge of that occurring.
You don't have any knowledge, or you don't recall?
I don't have any knowledge.
Evidence also suggests that...
Given that what I saw you do, are you questioning that?
Well, I just find it intriguing. Let me just tell you that there's evidence that suggests that phone call took place and that's what was said. So let's move to the next question.
Now, your report, and today you said at all times the special counsel team operated under, was guided by, and followed Justice Department policies and principles. So which DOJ policy or principle sets forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined?
Can you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah. Which DOJ policy or principle set forth a legal standard that an investigated person is not exonerated if their innocence from criminal conduct is not conclusively determined? Where does that language come from, Director? Where is the DOJ policy that says that? And because there is a presumption of innocence, prosecutors never, ever need to conclusively determine it. Now, Director, the special counsel applied this inverted burden of proof that I can't find and you said doesn't exist anywhere in the department policies, and you used it to write a report. And the very first line of your report, says, and as you read this morning, it authorizes the special counsel to provide the Attorney General with a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by the special counsel. That's the very first word of your report, right?
That's correct.
Here's the problem, Director. The special counsel didn't do that. On volume 1, you did. On volume 2, with respect to potential obstruction of justice, the special counsel made neither a prosecution decision or a declination decision. You made no decision. You told us this morning and in your report that you made no determination. So respectfully, Director, you didn't follow the special counsel regulations. It clearly says, write a confidential report about decisions reached. Nowhere in here does it say, write a report about decisions that weren't reached. You wrote 180 pages. 180 pages about decisions that weren't reached, about potential crimes that weren't charged or decided. And respectfully, by doing that, you managed to violate every principle and the most sacred of traditions about prosecutors not offering extra prosecutorial analysis about potential crimes that aren't charged. So Americans need to know this as they listen to the Democrats and socialists on the other side of the aisle, as they do dramatic readings from this report, that volume 2 of this report was not authorized under the law to be written. It was written to a legal standard that does not exist at the Justice Department. And it was written in violation of every DOJ principle about extra prosecutorial commentary. I agree with the chairman this morning when he said Donald Trump is not above the law. He's not. But he damn sure shouldn't be below the law.
In fact, Fusion GPS is the reason we had a Mueller investigation in the first place. But, of course, you knew that because you're paying attention. Somehow Robert Mueller himself did not know that. What does that say about Robert Mueller? Well, this isn't a medical program, so we're not going to speculate about it. What we can say for certain, though, is that Robert Mueller never should have been testifying before Congress today. He didn't want to come. He came because Democrats forced him. They knew his condition. They were happy to exploit him anyway, and they did. To the left, the individual is always far less important than the mission, and the mission never changes, acquiring political power. Watch the congenitally shameless Jerry Nadler of New York use Mueller as a kind of human backboard. Throw the question, get it back.
So the report did not conclude that he did not commit obstruction of justice. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what about total exoneration? Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
Now, in fact, your report expressly states that it does not exonerate the president.
It does.
Mueller did not exonerate the president. That was the headline on CNN today. Of course it was the headline. And that was the point of asking the question in the first place, to create a headline. Unmentioned was the fact that prosecutors don't exonerate anyone, ever. Prosecutors charge people with crimes, or they don't. That's the full scope of their power. Only God exonerates. The whole thing was a dishonest word game. Moments later, in fact, Robert Mueller conceded that his was the first Justice Department investigation in history to claim that its unindicted subject was not exonerated.
Can you give me an example other than Donald Trump where the Justice Department determined that an investigated person was not exonerated because their innocence was not conclusively determined?
I cannot, but this is a unique
Okay,
situation.
well, you can't, time is short, I've got 5 minutes, let's just leave it at, you can't find it, because I'll tell you why, it doesn't exist.
That was probably the high point of the day for everyone participating, everyone watching at home. Most of the rest of the time, it was depressing to watch. Mueller seemed deeply confused, at times confused about why he was there. Repeatedly, he struggled just to hear the questions he was being asked. When he did hear them, his answers often revealed he was not familiar at all with the report that bears his name.
Collusion and conspiracy are essentially synonymous terms, correct?
No.
If no, on page 180 of volume 1 of your report, you wrote, as defined in legal dictionaries, collusion is largely synonymous with conspiracy, as that crime is set forth in the General Federal Conspiracy Statute 18 U.S.C. 371. I'm reading your report, sir. It's a yes or no answer.
Page 180?
Page 180, volume 1.
Okay.
This was from your report.
Correct. And I leave it with the report.
So the report says, yes, they are synonymous.
Yes.
Hopefully, for finally, out of your own report, we can put to bed the collusion and conspiracy.
It went on like this for more than 6 excruciating hours. We hope you were doing something else today. We can tell you, though, that over 200 times Mueller simply declined to answer the question at all. Repeatedly, he said that critical questions central to the Russia investigation weren't in his purview.
You have any basis as you sit here today to believe that Steele was lying?
As I said before, I'll say again, it's not my purview. Others are investigating what you
So it's not your
addressed.
purview to look into whether or not Steele's lying. It's not your purview to look into whether or not anti-Trump Russians are lying to Steele. And it's not your purview to look at whether or not Glenn Simpson was meeting with the Russians the day before and the day after you write 3,500 words about the Trump campaign meeting.
So, given what we've already said about Mr. Mueller, we don't want to be cruel here, but we also want to be clear about what he's indicating. Mueller just told us that he doesn't know if Christopher Steele is lying about the basis of the entire Russia investigation. Nope, he doesn't know. And by the way, he doesn't care. Keep in mind, Robert Mueller is the very same man who, as of right now, is trying to send Roger Stone to prison for the rest of his life for telling minor and totally irrelevant lies, allegedly, that hurt no one. But he doesn't care to know if Christopher Steele is lying about the most important question in the investigation to which he's dedicated 2.5 years of his life. It's enough to shake your faith, actually, if you think about it for a minute. By the end of the day, even partisan Democrats had to admit that Mueller's testimony had been a complete debacle.
As they were using him for clarity, he'd somehow fog it up.
But he
and how he would do certain things. And so, look, on optics, this was a disaster.
Was the ball advanced?
No.
Impeachment's over.
Today, he was a witness. And he frankly wasn't a really good witness because he declined to answer, by my count, over 100 times.
I thought he was boring. I thought in some cases he was sort of evasive. I thought it really was a very ineffective defense of his own work.
Look, from the Democratic perspective, to me so far, it's been a bit of a bust.
A lot of Democrats in particular used the D word and branded this a disaster early on.
At the very least, we now know the truth about Robert Mueller, a mysterious prosecutor with unchecked power, revealed at last to be a daft old man blinking in the sunlight once his curtain was torn away. It was a sad coda to the long and ridiculous Russia saga. An absurd story for certain, but not a harmless story, hardly. This years-long charade deeply hurt this country. It corrupted our most important institutions. It divided our people. But worst of all, it distracted all of us from our real problems, which are legion. Get in the car tomorrow morning and drive 5 hours in any direction in this country. Stop frequently. Look around. How's America doing, do you think? Now remember that all the sadness you just saw on your drive, the drug zombies and the homeless people, the payday loan places, the boarded up buildings, all the slow motion disasters unfolding unmistakably all around us, all of that has been completely ignored for years in favor of some stupid invented story about Russian spies that never even made sense and didn't even happen. A ruling class did that. They did that to you as a distraction. They do not deserve to rule. That much is clear.
It was a painting a picture. That the Democrats said they want to paint a picture. Well, why don't we start with today? Let's paint the picture of today. What did we find out?
Mr. Mueller came here today, and actually, for anybody who wants to separate collusion and conspiracy, we put that to rest today. That's a synonymous term, and even in his report he said so. So for all the accusations out there that said there's collusion in plain sight, there's all this out there, we put that to rest today. We're painting a picture. When they tried to paint a picture today by putting up slides today and talking about obstruction and going through these different acts and even putting green check marks beside it, and then at the end when asked about it, Mr. Mueller says, I disagree with your theory or your interpretation. When we go through this, what we are seeing is, and in my committee, it's really interesting today because it was agreement on the one thing that there was Russian and foreign interference in our 2016 election. But what has been the answer from my committee and my majority and my chairman? To bring no bills forward, to bring no solutions forward. In fact, all we want to do is paint a picture of a president that they despise. They've done so since 2016, and for 7.5 months, that's 7 months, that's all we've done in our committee. Someone asked me yesterday, how did you prepare for the Mueller hearing? Didn't have to worry about it because that's all my committee talks about. For 7 months, all we talk about. And everything we've come up with is show hearings, dog and pony shows, running out old people from Watergate era. And what have we found? That the American people are footing the bill for a continuation of 2016 election that they don't like. So the question I have is, if we're going to paint a picture, then let's paint the picture of what's actually happening. You have a Democratic majority who has no agenda, who has a Democratic majority who has trouble bringing bills to the floor, who has a Democratic majority in our own committee where the very things that they talk about, immigration, election interference, and others, could be dealt with, but they don't bring any bills forward. In fact, even tomorrow, we're going to have another hearing to talk about the problem on the border instead of fixing the problem on the border. I challenge the Democratic colleagues, get over the election of 2016. Run in 2020 if you want. This president has put forward a great economy. This president's put forward great ideas. Run on those. Quit trying to dredge up a picture that today got painted that said your investigation is over. Mr. Mueller's done his job. He presented a report. Someone asked, did you find out anything new? The answer is no. We've had the report for 3 months, and Mr. Mueller simply said what was in the report. That collusion and conspiracy were over, and the observations of obstruction by the Democratic majority, he didn't subscribe to their theory. Neither do the American people. That's why we're fighting for real solutions instead of the continuation of the show. That's the picture that was painted today.
Do you have confidence that he was fully capable of running this investigation? What was your takeaway with his performance?
I think the takeaway for the Democrats who are trying to back channel that his performance wasn't good is they just didn't simply like the answers. I mean, it's a certain thing when you go through, and so for someone who ran an organization like he did, what was really interesting was he had 488 pages, millions of documents, the testimonies. He had a command, he had his advisors there. He answered the questions as we went through them. I think the bottom line is the Democrats didn't like how he answered them, so they're trying to find a way to salvage something. They're trying to find a way to say that what we did today actually mattered and that they haven't been wasting people's time or money.
What is your view of what emerged from the Mueller hearings?
The biggest takeaway, I would say, is that Mueller was confronted. How could you invert the presumption of innocence and reverse the burden of proof, depriving the president of a bedrock principle? And Mueller's answer was, well, I don't know of any other cases in which prosecutors exonerate.
It was unbelievable.
You had the chairman of the Intel Committee lie to the American public for the last 2 years, that he had proof, he had evidence. We found that that was not true. You had the investigations, you had the report. And today, you had the hearings. You have a chairman of Judiciary who ran for his chairmanship based upon that he proposed to his own conference that he would be the very best person for impeachment. This has been their goal, but none of the evidence has panned out. The only people who have been hurt in this are the American public. I watched the Democrats' press conference. I watched their body language. I watched what they spoke of. They know this is not what they wanted to see today. It was not the answers they wanted to hear. Even when they laid out this theory, Mueller said, no, I disagree. This should be the end of the chapter of this book that we put America through. It is time to solve the problems. I understand this majority has no agenda. I understand that they can't pass something outside of a resolution. But the American public expects more from this Congress. It would be the best advice for these Democrats to put the American public first and move forward to the issues that we can solve. Yes, sir.
Leader McCarthy, you were with the president today at the White House during, I think, the hearings. What was his mood, and was he watching the hearings, and what was his take on that?
The president was working on issues. We were working on issues today. I think he had caught some of it. He was very upbeat. I've watched this president be upbeat almost every single day. With President Trump, his cup is always half full. To think what this poor president had to go through. If you sat for 3 years and hear somebody say a lie about you, and with each turn of the corner, it gets proven correct. I watched a question before Mueller, did anybody in the White House not come and testify to you? No. The number of papers before him. While you had people on the other side actually lie to the American public, ahead of the Intel Committee. That's the question that I have for the Speaker of the House. Knowing what she knows now, how can Adam Schiff still be chairman of a committee that we have to have trust in on the intel around the world when he lied to the American public?
But let's stop the continuous investigation into something that's we've already spent 3 years on, and let's focus on those issues that really matter to the American people.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Today, the special counsel oftentimes answered questions with one word. Sometimes he didn't have total command of the details that appeared.
The picture that was painted today, though, was a long-time investigator who simply laid the facts out. They just don't like
He said that he's at the top of the hearing. The president was not totally exonerated. Do you accept that? He was not totally exonerated according to what Mueller said?
Well, I think if you watch the hearings today and you watch both the Intel and Judiciary Committee, we discussed this issue of exoneration and where that legal theory that he would even come out was a very novel theory because it's never been used before. It was not something for him to exonerate, which is also a flip side to say there was not enough there to find guilt. So instead of going from the opposite side, instead of exoneration, which he was not there to do, he's never done before and none have ever done before, there was also saying that he didn't have enough to go forward on. So as we move forward again, if I was the Democrats, and just as they just got through talking about it in their own press conference, I would be frustrated too because they had promised and promised and promised that Mueller investigation was the gold standard. It would solve all their problems. The problem is they got to the end and it didn't tell them what they wanted to sell.
All right, we have big breaking developments tonight on our quest for equal justice and to hold those that have abused power accountable. Let me give you a headline. There's a lot of news coming this week that I know of, so stay tuned. But according to just released reports, Judicial Watch, a federal court now has ordered a hearing about whether to speed up the release of key, struck, page, text documents. And the American Center for Law and Justice has now obtained the Obama DOJ's immunity agreements with Hillary Clinton lawyers, Cheryl Mills, Heather Samuelson, to, quote, now pay attention, I'm not making this up, to dispose of evidence and refuse to comply with federal law. I'm sure they do that for Donald Trump, too. To dispose of evidence and refuse to comply with federal law. I'm sure they do that for Donald Trump, too. Now, this all comes as sources are telling Fox News tonight that John Durham, he is the prosecutor from Massachusetts, that he is zeroing in on why certain pieces of exculpatory material may have been withheld from the FISA court as it pertains to spying on the team of Trump. Here now with more reaction, author of the Next Red Wave, ACLJ Executive Director Jordan Sekulow, along with Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. Let's start with, hang on a second. I've never heard, except for Strzok and Page destroying their phones, which Mueller did, I've never heard of the attorneys for Hillary Clinton in a case where we know the evidence is overwhelming. She had these emails, Jordan, and we know that she also deleted the subpoenaed emails and all that stuff in the bleach pit. I never heard of allowing the destruction of evidence, and those two lawyers sat in when she was being interrogated by the FBI. Either of you ever hear of that before? Because I haven't, Jordan.
No. I mean, first, they were aides to Hillary Clinton. Cheryl Mills was her chief of staff when she was Secretary of State, and Heather Samuelson was her senior advisor and White House liaison for the Secretary of State and the State Department. Then when Hillary Clinton leaves the Secretary of State position, they become her private attorneys. They take over these emails. They're called culling computers. Each one had one. These were the backups to the infamous server out in Colorado that had the 62,000 emails on them. Each had it, and guess what? Each was going through as now Hillary Clinton's lawyers and deleting emails, Sean. So when this investigation began, they wanted to make sure right off the bat they were immune from the Espionage Act, the Records Act, the Classified Information Act. I mean, crimes that bring prison time of up to 28 years if you combine them for each of these actors, and yet they get full immunity. But not just that, as you said, they also get the DOJ and FBI to agree to not allow the American people to access this information on their computers via FOIA, and we've got that document right here. And then they'll destroy the computers for Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson and the Clinton team.
Obviously, that would never happen for Team Trump.
Well, Hillary Clinton facing an uphill battle, fighting the perception that, well, she's just not trustworthy. And, well, here's another reason why. A new State Department email reveals that a major donor to the Clinton Foundation was appointed to a government intelligence advisory board, even though he had zero experience in the field. And in an ironic twist, it turns out that Bill Clinton was paid over $16 million by laureate international universities to be, quote, the honorary chancellor. Of course, this is the same university that was slapped with a class action lawsuit last year by students saying that they were scammed. A university also being funded by the State Department. Joining me now, Danielle is back, along with Christopher Bedford and Jillian Melcher. Christopher, the ironies on this, they run so deep. Well, let's take both of them. This major donor gets appointed to a very sensitive intelligence advisory board of sorts, has zero experience. Someone does an investigation and he resigns.
Well, a huge thing about this is what Americans understand. Now, Hillary clearly broke the law with her emails. It's almost certain. But people don't really care. They don't really understand the issue. What they do understand is corruption. You see someone with no experience you see the State Department, ABC caught him dead to rights, scrambling to come up with a reason why this guy's in the nuclear council. And it's only because he's a donor to the Clintons. And the same thing has been coming out with Gulf states and places that trade in blood diamonds and human slavery, giving $100 million to the Clinton Foundation while she's Secretary of State. And people understand that kind of corruption. And it kind of comes across as well with this Clinton story, with Bill Clinton taking $16.5 million from a private for-profit university. This story broke in 2015, and Bloomberg covered it, and we covered it a little bit. But just like a lot of Clinton stories, they say, oh, that's old news, that's old news. Now that people are really paying attention, because they say, geez, this Donald Trump stuff's kind of weird, now they're paying attention, looking back like, whoa, hold on a second. Bill Clinton, you're guilty of all of this. And Hillary, who's focused now on online colleges, that's her platform, not for-profit colleges, to keep her husband out of this. Now they're going to look at her with a renewed eye like we are right now.
They are. Jillian, it doesn't, the numbers themselves, he gets $16 million. I think it was over, what, a 4 or 5 year period. That's a lot of money to be honorary anything.
Former 2016 GOP presidential candidate, former Governor Mike Huckabee, Fox News contributor Pat Caddell. Governor, as I talk to you, I'm going to put up just the WikiLeaks revelations specific to the Clinton server up, and then we'll go to the new revelations today. This is obvious law-breaking, I'd use the word bribery, cover-up, destruction of, materials. It actually seems to now make sense that they had the private server because they didn't want Freedom of Information Act request or congressional oversight because of all the money they're making.
Well, it was a very good way for them to cover up their tracks. I've said this week that the big difference between the Clintons and the Sopranos were that the Sopranos didn't leave an email trail, and the Clintons didn't think they were going to either. But the fact is, the WikiLeaks exposure has revealed what really amounts to nothing less than a criminal enterprise. And the shocking thing is, people are going to vote for someone on Tuesday who is either a person who believes that the job of president is serving the public or sucking the life out of the public. This is why Hillary Clinton cannot be president, because they have used every government agency and all the powers to do two things: protect themselves from being accountable to the laws that the rest of us have to live by, and then to use those powers for self-enrichment and for going after their political enemies. Imagine, if you will, Hillary Clinton having the power of the IRS and all these agencies.
They were making enough money. It's inexplicable to me. Why? Did they need that much more money?
Well, Sean, you got to remember who they're hanging out with. They're hanging around with the George Soroses. They're hanging around with all the billionaires who have so much money that they'd like to be part of that. And, you know, to make $153 million as they did on speeches between 2001 and 2015, that's a pretty good gig. You know, Bill Clinton gets $100,000 just to have a meeting with somebody.
Is it worth the
you know,
let me bring Pat in here. If she's elected, you were just telling me before we came on the air, this is a disaster for this country.
Well, I think the problem is I went through Watergate. You know, I was the youngest person on Richard Nixon's enemies list. I think I may be the oldest on Hillary's at the moment, but leaving that aside, I think that, you know, what we learned is that presidency was consumed when Watergate exploded. This has already exploded. We're talking about someone, and I think American people, if they think about it, will have a huge impact, because if the day she's elected, this crisis starts. It will not go away. It's not going away unless she pardons herself, or if Obama pardons her, which would blow the country wide open.
So we will be more divided than ever before.
And nothing will happen.
Be paralyzed.
And nothing will happen. The country in a moment of crisis. So that's really the choice. This will all be about her and the Clintons. And what I agree with the governor. I mean, my God, what you're seeing here is a criminal enterprise, really. And we all know the foundation was always much worse. And it is about money, and it's about many things. But you know what, most of all, the country is tired of corruption. And the word that's not allowed to be spoken inside the Beltway and by the political elites is corruption. And the country, you've got over 87% of people who believe that they're corrupt.
Exit question for both of you. I'll start with you, Pat. Who's going to win this election?
I think at the moment, let me just say, we're in motion, and I think it's moving Trump's way. I lived through 1980.
You think it's the same?
And I think it could be
Governor, who's going to win?
Donald Trump is going to win. It's not going to be as close as people think, and I've said that since the summer when his poll numbers were low.
We got to
still
take a
believe
break
it today.
Thank you both. We'll continue. The Daily Caller tonight reporting that the Soros-backed Democracy and Daily Caller tonight reporting that the Soros-backed Democracy Integrity Project paid firms tied to Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, the foreign agent, a whopping $3.8 million in 2017. Why? To dig up dirt on, quote, government entities. Now, despite all that we have uncovered night after night, James Comey, well, he's continuing to remain defiant, insisting that he has nothing to hide. We've tried to remind him many times, Jimbo, you have the right to remain quiet. You may want to exercise that right as you dig a deeper hole every day. Like, signing off on a FISA warrant, saying it's verified, and telling Trump it's salacious but unverified months later. Take a look.
Investigate what? Investigate that investigations were conducted, and what would be the crime you'd be investigating? So it's a terrible cycle to start. He's already started it with calling for the locking up of his political opponents, including people like me. And so it would just be more of that dangerous step. And I would hope, although they continue to disappoint me, the Republicans would finally stand up and say, we don't do that kind of thing. But me personally, ask me questions. Go ahead. I'd like to answer them in the daylight if I could.
I'd like to see that too, because now we know a lot more than we did before. Here with reaction, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman, Senator Lindsey Graham. When the president was on this program last week, Senator, the president said very clearly there will be a cascade of information. Doug Collins today releasing yet another closed-door testimony, Bill Priestap, in this particular case, very revealing. Then we're going to get the FISA applications, aren't we? The ones that the Grassley-Graham memo said the bulk of information came from the phony Hillary bought and paid for Russian dossier. Interesting. Then we're going to have Gang of Eight information, and we'll get 302 information. Democrats aren't asking for that transparency, but we will get it, and you will continue. You've made that promise to us.
Yeah, well, let me tell you why. Because millions of Americans believe at the top level of the Department of Justice and the FBI, they wanted Clinton to win and Trump to lose. They manipulated the law to let her off, manipulated the facts in the law to go after Trump. And that's a big deal to a lot of people, Republicans and some independents. So I promise you, former Director Comey will get to testify in the light of day. I'll ask him about the dossier. Was it the chief reason you got a warrant against Carter Page? Is it verified to this day? If there's a counterintelligence investigation opened against the Trump campaign, why didn't you tell Trump about it so he could do something like you told Feinstein? And at the end of the day, how could you write that Clinton did nothing wrong even before you interviewed her? And why did you interview her with two people in the room, her aides, and not under oath? Most people don't get that treatment.
All right, so the important thing is your committee will take over where the House Intel Committee left off, so it gives you a big leg up. But then I don't know at what point a lot of this information will be released. I believe the president is serious when he says that that information is coming out. You raise a lot of other questions with Comey. I would argue, as Greg Jarrett and others, lawyers on this program have argued, that there is a vulnerability for Comey. There's a vulnerability for Strzok and Page. There is a vulnerability for McCabe. We know criminal referrals will be coming this week from Devin Nunes, a number of them.
So criminality, it's not my job to find out if crimes were committed. It's my job as oversight of the executive branch. Did they bend the rules? Did they break the rules to get an outcome? Did they mislead the FISA court? Do we need to change the rules about FISA courts? Are there any rules at all about counterintelligence operations? Why didn't you not tell Trump? You told Feinstein she had somebody on her staff working with China. Why didn't you go to Trump and tell him about suspicions about Russia? Was it a backdoor attempt to get in his campaign? Some prosecutor, not a politician, needs to look at Comey, McCabe, and all of these characters to find out if, in fact, they broke the law. And I'm hoping Attorney General Barr will assign somebody to this case with the same resources and commitment to look at them as Mueller had to look at Trump.
Welcome to Hannity Busy News Night. We're glad you're with us because we are tracking multiple major breaking stories as we begin. And tonight, the deep state is in even more deep trouble, no pun intended. U.S. Attorney John Durham has been appointed to investigate the origins of the Russia probe. This is huge news. This is the boomerang we've been telling you about, a massive step forward. Now, Durham is a nonpartisan career U.S. attorney. He specializes in uncovering corruption at the highest levels of our federal government. Now, back in the early 2000s, Durham was appointed to investigate the FBI's Boston Police Field Office, and resulting in a conviction of an FBI special agent as well as another law enforcement official connected to the notorious gangster Whitey Bulger. In 2009, Durham was appointed to investigate abuses in the CIA. Over his decades-long career, well, Durham has successfully prosecuted dozens of government officials, gang members, drug traffickers alike, and he has been praised by members on both sides of the aisle for his steady and cautious pursuit of truth and of justice. And tonight he is squarely focused on why our country's most sensitive intelligence tools were turned against its own citizens at the height of a presidential election. Now, Fox News is reporting that Durham is collaborating with the Inspector General Michael Horowitz in his ongoing investigation into FISA abuse and FISA abuse fraud. And get this, Durham's investigation is not new. It has now been underway for weeks and possibly even months. And needless to say, the bad actors in the deep state, they are getting very nervous tonight. And they're now turning on each other. Little circular firing squad forming. Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, well, they're blaming Loretta Lynch for the rigging of the investigation into Hillary Clinton and her server and obstruction of justice. And Bruce Orr, well, he's blaming the DOJ and FBI officials for ignoring his warning about Christopher Steele and the dossier. Well, that was in August of 2016. James Comey is trashing Strzok and Page on national TV, and he's also in a fight with Rod Rosenstein. They're attacking each other's character. And also, Andrew McCabe is attacking anyone pretty much with a pulse. Well, it's crisis mode for the deep state, and it's every man, every woman for themselves. Even Comey's former general counsel at the FBI, James Baker, he's trying to get ahead of this story by warning that Horowitz is going to uncover some major mistakes in the FISA process. You think? Take a look.
The Inspector General is looking at everything that we did, and if the IG usually finds mistakes that we made, and so I expect him to find mistakes this time. But I can say that, at least from the intent of the people that I was dealing with, there was no intention to do anything wrong or illegal.
Let's see, mistakes? You mean like using untrue, something that is unverifiable, Russian misinformation, propaganda, outright lies, paid for by Hillary Clinton to literally inform the American people because it was leaked to the Washington Post, David Corn and Michael Isikoff as the very basis for a warrant to spy not only on an American citizen, but an American citizen working for the Trump campaign and the entire opposition party that none of these guys we know wanted to win that election. Well, interesting. Or like when James Comey swore that information provided to the FISA court, he signed that first FISA application, he was signing that that was true and correct and verified and corroborated. And by the way, the application has the word verified on it. Now, Mr. Baker, that would not be a mistake. That would be willful, premeditated, a criminal act committed for the sole purpose of deceiving and committing a fraud on the FISA court and stripping Americans of their constitutional, inalienable rights while trying to also simultaneously rig a presidential election in the United States. And not only did Comey make no attempt to verify or corroborate Steele's so-called intelligence, well, there is now again more growing evidence tonight that Comey knew full well that Steele was completely unreliable. A brand new report breaking from investigative reporter from The Hill, John Solomon, showing that the State Department official, Kathleen Kavalek, did, in fact, inform a high-ranking official at the FBI about her meeting with Steele. Many days, many as 10 days before the FISA warrant against Carter Page, the first one was submitted in October of 2016. Here on this developing story, investigative reporter from The Hill, we have our friend John Solomon is with us. All right, this is getting more interesting by the day, and there is no doubt that they were warned. Especially Bruce Orr warned everybody. That was in his closed-door testimony. But in this particular case, this woman, Miss Kavalek, she, in fact, warned them directly.
Yeah, it's important. For the first time, we know who in the chain of command actually got tipped off by the State Department that Steele had made this remarkable appearance on October 11, 2016. The person she identified is a guy named Stephen Laycock. At the time, he was the section chief for Eurasia inside the FBI counterintelligence investigation, so the division that was doing the Russia investigation. My sources tell me he immediately forwarded Kavalek's information to the team running the Russia case, which would have been Pete Strzok's team. Why is this important? We know from the October 11th meeting notes now that the State Department detected from Steele inaccurate information about his allegations about Russia collusion, that he had an election deadline, a political motive, an election day deadline to get this dirt on Trump out to the public, and that he had been leaking to the media, specifically the Washington Post and New York Times. The FBI should have gone and checked that out. That's what former people who held Mr. Laycock's job today, the prior predecessors say that's what we do at the FBI. When we get a tip-off that our informant is rogue talking, you go back and you check it. You don't just proceed with your FISA and ignore what went on. So a very important development tonight and a new witness identified for those in Congress in the Inspector General's investigations.
All right, what do you know about what's going on with the Inspector General report and Mr. Durham, who's been appointed, and our reporting tonight shows that he has been working for at least a number of weeks, if not maybe months?
Yeah, I think that most significantly, this gives the Inspector General investigation the ability to get grand jury subpoenas through a sitting U.S. attorney. So it creates a new investigative tool that Inspector Generals don't normally have. They're usually administrative in their approach. And remember, some of the people that are keeping piece that can be played here to get to the bottom of the truth.
Anything you hear, Operation Crossfire Hurricane, which is why they're all turning on each other, Operation Boomerang, no longer telling you, it's now happening. It's cascading down. No with the Hill, John Solomon. Thanks for joining us tonight. And Truth and Justice, as we've been telling you, it's now happening. It's cascading down. No one in the deep state is safe from justice, which is why they're all turning on each other. Operation Boomerang, no longer Operation Crossfire Hurricane, is in full effect. The Russian hoax is now in the rearview mirror. Mueller is over. The entire witch hunt. Anything you hear going forward, well, that is only noise. The president didn't collude. He didn't obstruct. And the left's fake, phony narrative about the Trump campaign, their conspiracies about Russia, is not even on life support at this time. It is dead, it's buried, and it's not coming back. But the anti-Trump mob, especially in the media, they just can't seem to let it go. That includes, by the way, James Clapper, who was literally begging CNN to get back on message, get back to the conspiracy theory that's been disproven 4 times. Sure, great TV coverage.
We're kind of losing sight of what was the cause of all this. The predicate for all this was the Russians and the Russian engagement. And now we know apparently dozens of cases where Russian operatives, some of whom were known to have intelligence connections, were trying to engage with the Trump campaign. That's what the concern was, and was a predicate for any of this investigation. I wish people would pay more attention to Volume 1 of the Mueller report, the exhaustive detail about what the Russians did. And we're losing sight of that.
Actually, while James, many Republicans, like Congressman Devin Nunes, who will be joining us tonight, they've been warning about the Russia threat for years, 2014 most recently. This all happened under your watch and Biden's and Obama's watch. But it was then President Obama, he was just laughing it off. Tell Vladimir I'll have more flexibility after the election.
My last election, basically. Yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah. Yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and understand.
If you look at the Volume 1 of the Mueller report, you will see it was the Trump campaign that rebuffed Russian operations every step of the way. And while it was the Clinton campaign who actually paid for Russian disinformation in the form of a dirty dossier full of Russian lies. Let's talk about your obstruction, Hillary, your violation of the Espionage Act. You're putting America's national security at risk. Remember, we have overwhelming, incontrovertible evidence of your mishandling of top secret classified information on a private server. Even Comey admitted you had it. And remember, top FBI lawyer James Baker, general counsel of the FBI, thought you should be indicted. Is incontrovertible evidence of obstruction. Why did you destroy 33,000 emails and then bleach pit the hard drive and destroy the smartphones with hammers and remove the SIM cards? Oh, that means intent. The intent was to get rid of the evidence because of the underlying crime, the Espionage Act, 18 U.S.C. 793. But of course, the media ignores all of this, the corruption, the abuse of power, what is a two-tier justice system. Because don't forget about all the other Clinton corruption involving Russia. Remember Bill Cash again? How you doing? On Moscow speeches during the Uranium One deal, twice his fee. Hillary signed off on that deal. The kickbacks from the people involved in that deal, $145 million. Even while it was known Putin had thugs in America. We had a spy in his ring in America. Remember? We interviewed him, William Campbell. Bribery, extortion, money laundering, kickbacks, trying to get a foothold in our uranium market. William Campbell was on this show. He exposed it. New York Times suggesting maybe Russian disinformation from the get-go. That dirty Russian dossier that you, James Clapper, allegedly leaked to your current employer, fake news CNN, yeah, that one. Of course, that's no concern of the House Intel chairman. That would be Adam the Cowardly Schiff, who doesn't seem to care about government leaking or abuse of power, because Schiff is on an all-consuming mission to smear, slander, besmirch, attack the President of the United States, which is exactly why he is desperately trying to get Robert Mueller to appear before Congress. Maybe he doesn't realize it's over yet. Maybe somebody needs to tell him. Take a look.
We're in conversation with the special counsel's office, and it's not that they've confirmed a date, but this is going to happen. It has to. I think the Republicans and I think the Attorney General even understand that. That's why Barr has said repeatedly he's not going to stand in the way of Mueller testimony. I think that's because he knows he can't. That's just a bridge too far even for them.
He said he had evidence, too, and everything. The only one that we have on tape colluding with Russians is him. Remember, he was talking to a Russian hoaxer who said that he had, damning information on Donald Trump, and he was asked, what is the nature of the information? Naked Trump. Did Vladimir see it? Yes, but of course. Buzuka. Surrounding an actual hoax and conspiracy theory. 4 separate investigations cleared President Trump. The FBI's 9-month investigation under Comey came up with nothing. The special counsel's 20-month investigation, nothing. The House Intel Committee's investigation, nothing. The bipartisan Senate investigation, nothing. But then you got sleepy, creepy Uncle Joe Biden, who's desperate to try and win and delineate himself from the radical leftists in his own party. Well, some saying even the front runner at this moment, he's not going to let facts get in the way. During a question and answer session on the campaign trail, sleepy, creepy Uncle Joe put on his tinfoil hat conspiracy theory game and pushed his favorite Trump-Russia conspiracy theory. Shocking. Just lie to the American people and hope it works.
He's an illegitimate president in my mind. That's it. He's illegitimate. And my biggest fear is that he's going to do it again with the help of Vlad, his best pal, and we're going to be stuck for 6 more years with this guy. And that is terrifying. It's terrifying.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree. And one of the things we have to do here, we got to get this part straight, in my view.
All right, like most Democrats running for office, Biden is willing to say anything to score a cheap political point, whether they're smearing a nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court or attacking even a 16-year-old high school kid for daring to wear a Make America Great Again hat or pushing a Russia hoax over nearly 3 years now.
All right, so last night, President Trump, he took to Twitter and he wrote, quote, "Why isn't the House Intelligence Committee looking into the Bill and Hillary deal that allowed big uranium to go to Russia, Russian speech money to Bill, the Hillary Russian reset, praise of Russia by Hillary, or Podesta, Russian and company? Trump-Russia story is a hoax. Make America great again." Now, putting aside the embarrassing Russian reset strategy, the Hillary Clinton tried and failed to enact a Secretary of State. That's irrelevant right now. Tonight, I want to focus directly on what could be the single most damning connection between the Clintons and Russia. In other words, the rarely covered scandal. Ted Koppel probably didn't cover it. Now, tonight, for weeks now, we've been telling you there is zero evidence of this 8-month-old media conspiracy narrative that President Trump and his campaign were secretly colluding with Putin and the Russians. Zero evidence. Now, tonight, I want to focus on the real scandal that is rarely covered by this alt-left propaganda destroy Trump media, and it does involve the Clintons and an enormous mining company called Uranium One. Let me give you some background. Uranium One is a Canadian-based multinational operation. Now, they extract uranium, which, of course, is a key material that's used in nuclear weapons. They do it from Asia, Africa, and Australia. Now, Uranium One is responsible for 1/5 of all uranium production right here in the United States. Here's the backstory. Back in 2013, a company directly tied to the Russian government purchased Uranium One, a move, by the way, that was approved in part by Hillary Clinton's State Department. That's a very big deal. Now, this move allowed Russia and Vladimir Putin to control 20% of all uranium production right here in the United States. And you're thinking, that sounds weird, right? If you haven't heard this before, you're probably watching the mainstream media. And it gets a lot worse. In 2015, even the New York Times, they broke a bombshell report. The headline was, quote, "Cash flowed to Clinton Foundation amid Russian uranium deal." Now, according to the Times findings, Ian Telfer, who is the chairman of Uranium One, made huge, massive donations to the Clinton Foundation. Now, the Times writes, quote, "As the Russians gradually assumed control of Uranium One in 3 separate transactions, transactions from 2009 to 2013, Canadian records show a massive flow of cash made its way to the Clinton Foundation. And while millions of dollars flowed into the Clinton Foundation from the chairman of Uranium One, the Times also reported that Bill Clinton racked up massive, huge speaking fees in Moscow. The Times writes, quote, shortly after the Russians announced their intention to acquire a majority stake in Uranium One, well, Mr. Clinton received $500,000 for a Moscow speech from a Russian investment bank with links to the Kremlin that was promoting Uranium One stock. Now, right here on this program, Clinton Cash best-selling author Peter Schweitzer, he provided even more damning information into the Clinton connection to Uranium One. Remember, Putin and Russia, as a result of Hillary Clinton signing off, millions of dollars going to the Clinton Foundation, and Bill Clinton, they got 20% of our uranium as a result of this deal. Watch Peter. The Uranium One deal is the greatest example where Vladimir Putin now has control of 20% of our uranium resources, which is insanity. And there was how much paid in that deal when all is said and done?
Well, you have yeah, Sean, you have 9 individuals connected with this tiny uranium company that wants to be sold to the Russian government, which Hillary's State Department signs off on, in addition to other government agencies. But no other government agency had a head who had 9 individuals connected to that company that sent a combined $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, that is a massive conflict of interest.
That's unbelievable. Massive amount of money. They got a huge payback, and they now control 20% of America's uranium. Now, here's a big question. Why aren't the Democrats that have been pushing a theory that's false with no evidence for 8 months, why aren't members of the alt-radical left destroy Trump media? Why aren't they worried about what is the real alleged Russian association? They're so worried about Russia meddling in the election. Isn't this far more worthy of an investigation?
And the Attorney General of the United States says he doesn't think it was properly predicated. So let's figure out if it was, or if it wasn't, let's get an answer to that. And thank God that's exactly what he's doing.
And you have no concerns about this president's...
If you were falsely accused of something, you would be ticked off too. I mean, that's the problem here. And this whole thing is played out over 3 years. And remember what we learned today. They didn't even charge the guy who started the whole darn thing, this Joseph Nifson. He's the first guy to tell Papadopoulos to rush. He lies to the FBI 3 times, don't charge him. They charge everyone else who gave him false statements. They charge 13 Russians no one's ever heard of. But, oh, you can't charge the guy who actually started this whole 3-year saga we've endured as a country? I don't get that. That's why, again, I will say it until it's done. The investigation that's happening right now at the Justice Department is so darn important.
Yeah, I'll finish up. I agree with what's been said here about the further investigation, but the question you're asking, I'll address in this. And it goes back to a certain part of the hearing. Also, remember today that you talk about, I asked a specific question, Mr. Mueller, were you curtailed, hindered, or stopped from your investigation at all? His answer, no. So it goes back to obstruction. Was his answer? No. We talk about the actions of the president. John Dean, which I thought was just a farcical hearing that we had at point, but John Dean made a very interesting point because one of the Democrats, I believe, was asking him about advice, or if your boss gave you advice, would you follow it? And he said, you got to be very careful here about folks who are like this president, who has been so frustrated, who's been attacked from day one, has been very frustrated with this, but nothing happened to this investigation. We seem to gloss over that. We seem to gloss over the fact that it never stopped and we never went.
The president tried to interfere with the investigation?
The question at the end of the day is what happened. And the question is not for the ethereal hypotheticals that the Democrats are throwing out there. To hide a bad agenda, they simply want to attack this president. When Mr. Mueller said that.
I'm talking about what's in the report.
And we answered that today. When you come to the point when they laid out every possibility they could for obstruction, and Mr. Mueller looked at him and said, one, that I don't agree with your theory, that should tell you a lot right there.
Let's put it this way. There is absolutely no collusion. That has been proven. When you look at the committees, whether it's the Senate or the House, everybody, my worst enemies, they walk out, they say, there is no collusion, but we'll continue to look. They're spending millions and millions of dollars. There is absolutely no collusion. I didn't make a phone call to Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. Everybody knows it. That was a Democrat hoax. It was an excuse for losing the election. And it should have never been this way, where they spent all these millions of dollars. So now even the Democrats admit there's no collusion. There is no collusion. That's it. And we got to get back to running a country. What we have found, and what they have found, after looking at this really scam, is they found tremendous, whatever you want to call it, you're going to have to make up your own determination. but they found tremendous things on the other side. When you look at the Hillary Clinton investigation, it was, I've been saying it for a long time. That was a rigged system, folks. That was a rigged system. When you look at what they did with respect to the Hillary Clinton investigation, it was rigged. And there's never been anything like it in this country that we've ever found before. It's very, very sad. Very, very sad. Mr. President, will you